My family handed me an invoice for my freedom. The price was $9,500. I paid it. The cost was them. They called the diner a health hazard. They called me a disgrace. My sister, their perfect saint, held up her phone, put the camera in my face, and called me her personal charity case. Then she sold tickets to my rock bottom for likes and donations that went straight into her pocket. They thought the story ended there. They were wrong. My grandmother didn't just leave me recipes. She left me the truth written in ink. And it was about to burn their perfect world to the ground. Hi, I'm Lena, and this is the story of how I lost a family, but found myself in the ashes of a forgotten kitchen. Before I share everything, I just want to know you're out there. It's funny how a small connection across the world can make the heaviest stories feel a little lighter. Just drop listening in the comments, or let me know what city you're tuning in from. If you believe every family has secrets that deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe and follow this journey. Thank you. And now, here's what they prayed would stay buried forever. It all started, as it always did, around a dinner table. Not my table, never mine. It was theirs. The one in the cavernous dining room of my parents' house, a sterile space of white marble and chrome that always felt more like a gallery than a home. They called themselves connoisseurs, but I just called them the critics. I'd arrived early that Sunday, clutching a heavy cast iron pot like a peace offering. Inside was a lamb shank stew, slow braised for 6 hours in red wine and rosemary. It was my grandmother's recipe, and the rich, warm scent that filled my small apartment was the only real inheritance I felt I had. I hoped, with the naive part of me that refused to die, that the smell of home could just for a night make this house feel like one. My father was the first to taste it. He swirled the stew on his spoon, inspecting it like a jeweler examining a questionable gem. He brought it to his lips, and for a single, breathtaking moment, the critique left his eyes. The hard lines of his jaw softened. He closed his eyes, and I saw a flicker of a memory, a ghost of a boy who ate at a wooden table, not a marble slab. He was about to speak, to say something real, and my heart hammered against my ribs with a pathetic, familiar hope. That's when the click of stilettos on marble announced my sister's arrival. Anya swept in, a vision in cream-colored cashmere, holding a single perfect dessert on a slate plate. Passion fruit nitrogen foam with chocolate soil, she announced to the room. Then she glanced at my stew. She dipped a clean spoon and tasted it, and a perfectly constructed look of thoughtful pity crossed her face. "Oh, Lena, it's classic." She said the word, a beautifully polished insult, but a touch of hickory smoke, a deconstruction of the texture. It would be more relevant. Just like that, the ghost in my father's eyes vanished. He blinked, snapping back into his role. "Anya's right," he declared, his voice regaining its familiar, authoritative edge. "Cooking is about forward momentum, not looking back." The hope in my chest curdled. I was once again the sentimental relic, and Anya was the future. And the future, it turned out, was expensive. Over her cloud of foam, Anya announced she'd been accepted into a prestigious research stage at a Michelin-starred temple of molecular gastronomy in Copenhagen. She painted it as a victory for the entire family, a chance to put our name on the global culinary map. Then my mother, the second and colder of the critics, turned her gaze to me. "Lena," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Your savings account, the one from Grandma's inheritance." It's time to invest in the family's future. She wasn't asking. She was announcing a withdrawal, $40,000 to fund Anya's ambition. In the days that followed, the silence from my parents was a physical weight. I felt adrift, so I went looking for an anchor. I drove to the old industrial neighborhood on the east side, the one my grandmother had called home. I just wanted to see the place where she'd started to breathe the same air. I found her old address, but her little bakery was gone, replaced by the sterile green and white of a chain convenience store. It felt like a final erasure, a confirmation that the past I was clinging to no longer existed. Defeated, I was about to leave when I struck up a conversation with the old man running the newsstand across the street. I mentioned my grandmother, and his face lit up. "Ah, the hearth," he said. She didn't get pushed out. She moved just before she retired, a smaller spot a few blocks over on Sparrow Street. A new fragile hope fluttered to life. I found Sparrow Street a quiet lane of cobblestone and brick, and there it was, the hearth. It was worse than I could have imagined. The windows were boarded up, the paint was peeling, and the faded sign swung on a single groaning hinge. But it was real. I peered through a crack in the plywood and saw the ghost of a dining room chair stacked in dusty pyramids. A feeling washed over me, not just sadness, but a fierce, possessive sense of belonging. Then my heart sank. Tacked to the door was a faded, weather-beaten sign. 4 letters in stark red, "Sold." I was too late. The dream died before it had a chance to breathe. I turned away, the familiar taste of disappointment bitter in my mouth. I'd only taken a few steps when a scraping sound made me look back. A man in work overalls was prying the sign off the door. "You interested in this place?" he asked, seeing the look on my face. I said, my voice hollow. "Says it's sold." He laughed a short, sharp bark. "Yeah, to a guy whose financing fell through yesterday. His loss. The city's putting it up for public auction next Tuesday." Hope, violent and risky, surged back through me. It was no longer a ghost. It was a target, a finish line, and I had exactly 1 week to get there. I didn't go back to my parents' house to surrender. I went back to fight. I spent 2 sleepless days and nights, not just dreaming, but working. I drafted a full business plan for reviving the hearth, complete with cost projections, a phased renovation strategy, and a menu concept built around my grandmother's heritage recipes. I was appealing to the critics, to the restaurateurs they used to be. I presented it to them in their cold white living room. My father scoffed, but my mother, the pragmatist, actually took the folder. She put on her reading glasses and began to read. I watched her scan the columns of figures, her expression unreadable but focused. She looked up at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years: professional respect. "The numbers are ambitious," she conceded, "but not impossible." The hope was so bright it was blinding. Anya, sensing she was losing ground, chose that moment to strike. She didn't attack my plan. She attacked my heart. "It's not just a course, Mom," she said, her voice breaking with practiced perfection. Tears welled in her eyes. "It's the final selection for the new sous chef position. This is my entire career." "How can you do this to me, Lena?" she sobbed, turning to me. "How can you be so selfish as to sabotage my one chance, all for some selfish nostalgia sabotage?" The word hung in the air like poison. It hit its mark. The flicker of respect in my mother's eyes died instantly, replaced by a cold, familiar fury. The fear of their golden child, failing of the family, losing face, eclipsed everything else. She slid my business plan back across the table as if it were contaminated. The choice is simple. My father said, his voice flat and final. You transfer the money to your sister or you, and that pile of scrap are no longer part of this family. I won the auction. The winning bid was $9,500, almost every cent I had to my name. The brief, giddy thrill of victory vanished the moment I stepped inside the hearth. That night, the key cold in my hand. The silence was absolute. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of stale grease and damp plaster. A profound, crushing loneliness settled over me. This was it. This was the dream. A dark, freezing room full of ghosts and grime. To chase away the panic, I started to search, desperate, for a sign, for some token from my grandmother, to prove I hadn't just thrown my life away. I needed to feel her presence, her approval. Under the rotten wood of the cashier's counter, my fingers brushed against a small, loose plank. I pried it up. Inside was an old wooden recipe box. My heart leaped. This is it, I thought. This is the sign. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. But there were no recipes inside. It was filled with papers, yellowed official-looking documents, a stack of final notices from suppliers, letters from the bank thick with threats. And at the very bottom, printed on cold, bureaucratic letterhead, was a half-finished bankruptcy application, signed in my grandmother's shaky hand. The romantic legacy I had been chasing was a lie. My dream wasn't built on a foundation of love and soulful cooking. It was built on the wreckage of a failure. I sank to the floor, clutching the proof of my grandmother's broken dream in the dark, and for the first time felt the true chilling weight of being utterly alone. The first week inside the hearth was a masterclass in despair. The ghost of my grandmother's failure, embodied by that brittle bankruptcy application, became my constant, silent companion. It whispered to me from the dripping pipes in the ceiling and the flickering fluorescent light that cast long, dancing shadows across the grime. My already meager savings began to hemorrhage, not on charming renovations, but on essentials, a new circuit breaker, to stop the incessant buzzing of fee from the city for the property transfer. I hadn't anticipated a deposit for the gas company to even consider turning the service back on. Each expense was a small death, another shovelful of dirt on the grave of my dream. Every night, I'd collapse onto a lumpy cot in the back office, the chill of the concrete floor seeping through the thin mattress, and the question would echo in the dark. What have you done? On the fifth day, something inside me broke. I was running on 4 hours of sleep, my hands were raw from scrubbing, and my spirit felt as grimy as the floor. I stared at the ancient 6-burner gas stove, a monster of cast iron and neglect. After an hour of wrestling with it, I managed to get a single burner to sputter to life with a reluctant blue whoosh. Using the last of the canned tomatoes from my apartment pantry, a wilting onion, and a lone clove of garlic, I decided to do the only thing I had the strength left to do: cook. It wasn't for a business plan or a future customer. It was an act of survival. As I crushed the garlic, the sharp scent filled the air, cutting through the smell of dust and decay. I remembered my grandmother doing the same, telling me, "This is where the flavor is born, Lena, in the breaking." I let the soup simmer its rich red color, a stark defiance to the gray palette of my reality. The smell of basil and simmering tomatoes was a ghost of a happier time, a memory of warmth in this cold, forgotten place. A loud, insistent banging on the front door shattered the quiet. It was my next-door neighbor, the owner of the hardware store. He was a broad-shouldered old man whose face seemed permanently fixed in a scowl, and I'd seen him watching me from his doorway all week, his eyes full of silent judgment. "You're making a racket in here," he grumbled, his voice like grinding gears. His eyes swept over the mess, the tools, the general chaos of my efforts. But then he stopped, and I saw his nostrils twitch, his gaze fixed on the small pot on the stove. For a fraction of a second, the scowl faltered, replaced by a flicker of something else. Curiosity. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple human need to share something, anything. "Want some?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He stared at me, then at the pot, and after a long moment, gave a single curt nod. I found the only mug that wasn't cracked, filled it with a steaming soup, and handed it to him. He drank it standing there in the doorway, his silence a heavy, unreadable judgment. Every slurp echoed in the cavernous room. I scanned his face for any sign, a softening of the eyes, a hint of a smile, but there was nothing. When he finished, he handed the mug back, turned without a word, and left. The silence he left behind felt heavier than before. Another failed connection. Even my grandmother's soup wasn't enough. The next morning, as I was fighting with a rusted hinge on the back door, I heard the front door creak open. It was him again, Mr. Kowalski. He marched in his boots, echoing on the concrete, and placed a brand new heavy-duty set of pipe wrenches on my cleaner-than-yesterday counter. He pointed a thick, calloused finger toward the ancient water heater. "The intake valve is rusted shut." "This will fit," he said. He started to leave, then paused in the doorway, his back still to me. "Soup was okay," he mumbled, just loud enough for me to hear. "My wife used to make it better." He walked out before I could respond. It wasn't a compliment. It was a grudging admission. It was help disguised as a critique. And in that moment, it was everything. With Mr. Kowalski's gruff, unspoken alliance, the hearth began a slow, painful transformation from a tomb into a space with potential. A month passed in a blur of scrubbing, painting, and troubleshooting the building's ancient anatomy. I finally got the front counter clean enough to serve from. With no money for a grand opening, I started a pay-what-you-can soup window, serving hot soup in paper cups to the construction workers and local laborers. A small, quiet community began to form. A young art student started sketching in the corner. A tired nurse would stop by on her way home. They started calling me the Hearth Girl. For the first time, I felt a fragile sense of ownership, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. I thought, if I just kept my head down, my family would eventually forget about me. That hope shattered the day Anya's pristine white convertible, silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb. She didn't step out with anger, but with a dazzling, predatory smile and a smartphone mounted on a professional gimbal. "Lena, darling," she called out, her voice echoing in the quiet street as she glided in. "I came to see your little project." "Oh, wow, it's so rustic." Her eyes scanned the bare walls and mismatched chairs, her smile never faltering. Before I could find my voice, she was live on Instagram. "Hey, my beautiful souls," she cooed to her phone, her voice a perfect blend of compassion and concern. "I'm here at my sister's brave new venture, the Hearth." She panned the camera around, lingering on the patched walls and my secondhand equipment. Her narration twisted my sweat and hard work into a tragedy. She's trying so hard, pouring her heart and soul into bringing this historic place back to life. And I'm just so proud of her for trying. She walked into the kitchen, a lioness entering her territory. Look at this vintage stove, isn't it charming? Probably a bit of a fire hazard. She laughed lightly, but it has so much character. I stood frozen by the counter, a prop in her perfectly curated drama. I watched my own tired, dusty face appear on her screen as she turned the camera on me. This is my sister, Lena, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's always been the dreamer. I'm starting a little fund to help her get this place up to code to make her dream a safe reality. The live stream was a viral wildfire. Her campaign revived the hearth, raised thousands of dollars in a few hours, all directed to an account she controlled. My phone buzzed itself off the counter with notifications. I scrolled through a flood of pitying comments and heart emojis from Anya's followers. But then there were others. A handful of local food bloggers and community activists who saw right through her performance. One comment from a writer named Julian Vance stopped my breath. There's a difference between revitalization and violation. I'm interested in what Chef Lena is actually doing. Anya's attack had put me on the map, but it left me standing in the glare of a spotlight I never asked for, exposed, humiliated, and burning with a quiet, helpless rage. A few days later, a whirlwind of cinnamon cardamom and righteous anger blew into my diner. It was my great aunt Sophia, my grandmother's younger sister. The rich, complex scent of her spice shop in the Central Market always clung to her clothes. She slammed a worn leather satchel on the counter, her eyes flashing. I saw that disgusting, manipulative performance. She fumed, her voice sharp. She turned you into a charity case for her own vanity. She unzipped the satchel and pulled out a thick, old-fashioned bank book. Here, she said, pushing it towards me. Take this. Hire a proper crew. Fix this place up overnight and wipe that smug, sanctimonious look right off your sister's face. I stared at the bank book. It was an escape hatch, a lifeline, the easy way out. I could fix everything, prove them all wrong, and I wouldn't have to spend another night worrying about how to pay the electric bill. The temptation was a physical ache. But I looked around at the walls. I had scrubbed the pipes Mr. Kowalski had helped me tighten the counter I had sanded down by hand. This was mine. The struggle was mine. The victory, if it ever came, had to be mine too. I gently pushed the book back. Thank you, Aunt Sophia. More than you know, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I can't. I have to do this myself. I took a breath. But there is something I need. I need the truth. Everyone said Grandma was the best cook in this city. This place was beloved. Why did it fail? Aunt Sophia looked at me for a long time, her sharp eyes searching my face. She saw the desperation, but she also saw the steel underneath it. She nodded slowly. She reached into her pocket, but instead of an explanation, she pulled out a single, old-fashioned skeleton key, its surface pitted with rust. Your grandmother was a brilliant cook, but a terrible businesswoman, she said, her voice softening. She didn't trust banks with her money, and she didn't trust them with her heart either. She only trusted hearth salt and bread. This key doesn't open a door. She pressed the cold, heavy key into my palm and left me with the riddle, the challenge hanging in the air long after the scent of her spices had faded. For 3 days, the riddle became my obsession. Hearth, salt, and bread. I searched the main brick hearth of the kitchen, running my hands over every brick until my fingers were raw. Nothing. I tapped the walls of the cavernous cold bread oven, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing. I emptied the ancient heavy salt crocks in the pantry, finding only fossilized crystals at the bottom. Nothing. I was chasing a ghost, a poetic phrase with no real meaning, and the frustration was beginning to curdle into despair. The breakthrough came from the cleanup. I was clearing a corner of the cellar, where a section of wooden shelving had collapsed from rot, revealing the damp stone floor underneath. As I swept away decades of dust and debris, my broom snagged on the edge of a loose flagstone. It was barely perceptible, but it was different. My heart started to pound. I wedged my fingers into the tiny crack and pulled. It was heavy, but it lifted, revealing a small tin-lined hollow set into the earth, a makeshift safe protected from the damp. And inside that hollow was a small iron box. The key slid into the lock as if it had been waiting. It turned with a satisfying metallic click. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a thick, leather-bound journal. Victory, pure and absolute, washed over me. I unwrapped it reverently, the smell of old paper ink and a faint trace of vanilla filling the air. It was my grandmother's recipe book. I felt a wave of triumph of validation. I immediately searched for her most famous dish, the beef stew that had made her a local legend. I found it, her elegant script looping across the yellowed page. But as I read, a chill went down my spine. The recipe, I knew the one passed down to my mother, was a pale imitation. The original was a 3-day affair involving oxtail, a rare Portuguese brandy, and herbs I'd never even heard of. In the margin, in a tighter, more anxious script, was a heartbreaking note, simplified the recipe. Used cheaper cuts to lower the price for the lunch crowd. The dish has lost its soul. The business is losing its soul. I am losing mine. This wasn't a book of magic spells. It was a confession. My grandmother hadn't failed because she was a bad cook. She had failed because she had compromised, bending to the very same commercial pressures I was now facing. The triumphant discovery was now a solemn, chilling warning. I spent the next weeks living inside the journal. It became my Bible. I cooked. I followed the original recipes to the letter, treating them as sacred texts. The food was a revelation. Flavors I had only dreamed of bloomed on my tongue. The food wasn't just good, it was profound. My small but growing group of customers were astounded. Word started to spread. And then Julian Vance, the blogger, who had called out Anya, came in. He ate a bowl of the real beef stew in what seemed like a religious silence. The next day, his column was titled, "Forget Revival. At the hearth, a resurrection is taking place." For the first time since I'd bought the diner, I felt confident. I had the secret. I had the truth in my hands. The journal was my armor. Full of this newfound strength, I turned to the last few pages of the journal. The handwriting here was different. No longer elegant, but rushed, angry. The ink slightly blurred in places as if from tears. She described her final, most ambitious creation, an experimental dish she called Phoenix Consommé, a crystal-clear broth made from the purified ashes of charred root vegetables meant to symbolize rebirth from the ashes of struggle. It was her masterpiece. She wrote about a teenage, Anya's intense fascination with the dish, how she would watch for hours, asking endless probing questions. And then, the final entry. The words were a scar on the page. Anya begged me for the final step, the secret to clarifying the broth with egg whites without losing the ash flavor. I told her it was a secret of the heart, not of the mind that it couldn't be taught, only felt. Later that night, I found her in the cellar, trying to pry this box open with a screwdriver. Some pages are missing. My heart is broken. I let the journal fall from my hands. The air in the room went cold and thin. I grabbed my phone, my fingers numb and clumsy. I searched for the culinary competition Anya had won years ago, the one that had made her a star. The video loaded. There she was younger, smiling brilliantly for the cameras as the host announced the name of her winning dish, deconstructed phoenix tears. The world went silent. The warmth and pride of my recent success turned to ice in my veins. Her entire career, her fame, her identity, all of it was built on a stolen piece of my grandmother's broken heart. The fight was no longer about a diner. It was about reclaiming a legacy. And the grief that had weighed me down for weeks was finally forged into a cold, hard, and razor-sharp resolve. I knew exactly what I had to do. In the month leading up to the Port Cinder Food and Wine Festival, Anya's face was everywhere. It smiled down from banners strung across Main Street and beamed from the glossy pages of the festival program. She was the hometown hero, the headliner. Meanwhile, the hearth was a quiet success. I had a loyal following, a hum of happy customers that filled the small dining room every night. But in the landscape of the city's food scene, I was a footnote to her screaming headline. And I knew this festival was my only chance to change that. I called Julian Vance. "I don't have a story for you," I said when he answered. "But I'd like you to come taste one." He agreed to meet me the next day. But my family, it seemed, had spies everywhere. The night before my meeting with Julian, the bell above the hearth's door chimed, and my heart froze. My parents. The critics stood in the doorway, their presence sucking all the warmth out of the room. They didn't come to reconcile. They came to deliver a threat. "We hear you've been spreading unfortunate rumors." My father said, his voice as cold and hard as the marble floors in his house. "Let me be perfectly clear. If you do anything to embarrass Anya at that festival, I will personally see to it that this place is shut down. There won't be a health inspector in this city who won't find a violation. There won't be a supplier who will sell you so much as a bag of flour. Am I understood?" I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was war, and they were threatening to burn my entire world to the ground. For a moment, I was terrified. But as I looked at their hard, unforgiving faces, the fear was burned away by a sudden clarifying rage. Any last, lingering hope for a peaceful resolution, for a family that could be saved, died in that moment. They had made the choice for me. When Julian arrived the next day, I didn't hesitate. I locked the door, flipped the closed sign, and spent the next 8 hours cooking for an audience of one. I made him my grandmother's phoenix consommé. I didn't rush. I showed him the process, the patient clarification, the near magical transformation of ash and bone into a broth as clear as glass and as complex as a lifetime. He tasted it in silence, his eyes closed. When he opened them, they were wide with a kind of reverence. I don't understand," he whispered. "This is a masterpiece." Only then did I place the leather-bound journal on the table between us, opening it to the final tear-stained pages. I told him the story. Then I played the video of Anya accepting her award for deconstructed phoenix tears. He watched, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to disbelief, and finally to cold journalistic fury. He was no longer just a reporter. He was an ally. The main stage of the festival was a spectacle of light and steel. Anya was in her element, a high priestess in her chef's whites, dazzling the massive crowd with plumes of liquid nitrogen and the precise alien beauty of her modernist techniques. My parents sat in the front row, beaming like royalty. I stood near the back, a ghost at the feast, with Aunt Sophia's warm, steady hand on my shoulder. Anya finished her demonstration of the Phoenix Tears, and the crowd erupted in applause. The Q&A began. Julian Vance was the first to the microphone. "Chef Anya, a truly revolutionary dish," he began, his voice calm and professional. "Could you speak about its conceptual origins? What was your inspiration?" Anya flashed a brilliant smile, launching into a well-rehearsed monologue about innovation, about the courage to break from the dusty, sentimental traditions of the past to create something new. Julian waited for the applause to die down. "That's fascinating," he said, his tone still even. "Because I recently tasted a traditional consommé, a heritage recipe, from right here in Port Cinder, that bears a remarkable, almost foundational resemblance to the flavor profile of your dish. It's called Phoenix Consommé." A murmur rippled through the audience. Anya's smile tightened at the edges. "I'm sure it's just a coincidence," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Innovation often springs from similar." She never finished the sentence. The massive screen behind her, which had been showing an artful close-up of her dish, suddenly flickered. It split into two panels. On the left, a high-resolution scan of my grandmother's journal page, appeared the elegant script, the detailed recipe, the final heartbreaking entry about the theft. On the right, a grainy home video began to play. It was a clip of a teenage Anya at a family barbecue, proudly presenting a crude, cloudy version of the consommé to the camera, a clip I had found in a box of old tapes. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Anya spun around, her face a mask of horror. I saw her eyes dart to the tech booth at the side of the stage. But it wasn't Julian in there. It was Mr. Kowalski, giving a single, almost imperceptible nod. His late wife had been an event technician, and he had paid attention. The proof was undeniable broadcast for the entire culinary world to see. Anya stood frozen for a long, silent moment. Then, with a clatter, she dropped the silver foam dispensing siphon. It hit the stage, sputtering, a sad white puddle at her feet. She turned and fled, her heels clicking furiously as she disappeared backstage. My parents sat motionless in the front row, their proud smiles frozen into grotesque masks of disbelief. The silence was broken by the thunderous roar of 1,000 camera shutters, capturing the instant a star didn't just fall, but shattered. Months later, the hearth was no longer a secret. It was a destination. The story of the festival had become a local legend, and people came from all over, not just for the food, but for the story, for the authenticity. The dining room was alive every night, filled with the warm, happy buzz of conversation and the clinking of forks on plates. It was a sound I had come to cherish more than anything. One busy Tuesday evening, as I was expediting orders, the noise level at the front of the restaurant suddenly dipped. I looked up. There they were, standing in the doorway, my parents and Anya. They looked smaller, diminished, stripped of their usual armor of confidence. Anya, without her designer clothes and perfect makeup, just looked like a sad, tired woman. They asked if they could speak to me. I led them to a small empty table on the sidewalk, the evening air cool around us. Anya began to speak, her voice choked with tears. It was a rambling, pathetic apology, full of excuses about the pressure, about always feeling like she had to be the best, about how she never meant for things to go so far. For a moment, watching her cry, I felt a familiar, treacherous twinge of pity. The old, deeply ingrained longing for a family, for a sister, stirred in my chest. The reader in my own story, I held my breath, wondering if this was the part where the broken pieces were put back together, where forgiveness was offered and accepted. But then, I looked past them through the window of my restaurant. I saw Aunt Sophia and Mr. Kowalski sharing a bottle of wine at the counter. I saw Julian Vance in a corner booth scribbling in a notebook. I saw my staff, my new family working together in a seamless, joyful dance, and I knew that my home was already full. I listened until Anya's tears ran out. Then I nodded slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't recriminate. I turned to my head waiter, who had been watching from a distance, and whispered in his ear. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a small tray. On it was a single steaming bowl of my grandmother's simple chicken soup, the first recipe she ever taught me. He placed it on the table in front of them. I looked at my family, at these three strangers I had known my whole life. "This is all I can offer you," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's warm and it's honest. I wish you peace." And then I turned, walked back through the door of the hearth, and left them alone in the growing twilight. I didn't look back to see if they touched the soup. I walked straight into the light and noise of my kitchen, the smell of roasting garlic and fresh bread welcoming me home. I had not just rebuilt a diner, I had built a life. And I had learned that the best meals are the ones you share with the family you choose. The funny thing about the junk house my family despised is that it was the first place that ever truly fed me. For years, I had been starving for their love, accepting whatever scraps of approval they threw my way. I kept convincing myself that a little bit of poison was better than the emptiness of having nothing at all. And maybe that's the hardest lesson. You can't be nourished by a source that's determined to leave you hungry. The bravest thing you can do is to stop begging for a meal and decide to cook for yourself. My story is about a diner, but I know the feeling behind it is universal. That quiet, aching pain of not being seen by the people who are supposed to see you best. The gut-wrenching choice between their happiness and your own peace of mind. And that's why I want to end with a simple question for you. If you have ever felt that conflict, if you have ever had to choose yourself, even when it felt like you were breaking someone else's heart, or if you simply believe that everyone deserves a place where they are truly nourished, I just want you to comment yes below. You don't have to share your story. You don't have to explain. That one word is enough. It's a quiet way of raising a hand and saying, "I see it," or "I felt it too." Because sometimes just acknowledging the truth of a feeling is the first, most important step toward healing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this.